Joining us on the same page summer Bible reading plan, that means that this week you finish the book of Luke. And with that, we finish the fourth of the four Gospels. John is written, and which was the one we did first. John is written to the churches, and that is why there are more dialogues and less parables. Matthew was written after Stephen's stoning to a Jewish audience to explain why people were dying. Mark is written almost solely with Peter's help. Remember, 1 Peter 5:13 says Mark was dear to him and with him. And now Luke. Luke is written almost solely with the help of Paul. Luke was a constant companion of Paul. Luke's work is in two parts. One is the gospel and the other is the missionary adventures of Paul. And in 2 Timothy 4:11, Paul says at the end of his life, and it's probably the last thing he wrote, quote, "Only Luke is with me." Only Luke is with me. Luke's style, unlike the other gospel writers, is formally classical. You can see that in the way it starts, like many of Paul's epistles, with that "Dear Theophilus" format. Luke is likely a classically trained Gentile, and making Luke the only gospel then that would have been written by a Gentile. And that might account for some of the details in Luke that's not in the other gospels. Luke contains more stories about Gentiles or non-Jews or Jews compromised by Gentiles than any other gospel. The story of Zacchaeus, a Jew compromised by working for the Gentiles, is only in Luke. The parable of the Good Samaritan, a Samaritan, is only in Luke. The story of the 10 lepers, in which only one comes back who is a Samaritan, is only in Luke. And since Luke also writes Acts, Luke is the only author who details the conversion of the Gentiles. Also, Luke, as an author alone, writes about the descent of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, which is interesting to note because Luke's gospel uses the word Holy Spirit more than any of the other four gospels. And then if you add the book of Acts and Luke together, in the sum of all of Luke's writing, Luke writes more about the Holy Spirit than any writer in the whole Bible. He is the historian of the Holy Spirit. And if we were to turn the whole book of Luke, therefore, into an exhortation with a look at the particular focus of Luke and marking his specific emphases, well, what then are we being exhorted to in Luke? Well, as John is the theologian of love, Matthew is the theologian of biblical prophecy fulfilled, and Mark is the theologian of that phrase, the Son of God, with all the political and spiritual opposition it causes, then Luke is a theologian of the Spirit and the story. The Spirit and the story. In other words, of evangelism. Gabriel, notice how the story is put up. Gabriel tells Mary that the Holy Spirit would come upon her. And then Mary goes down to Elizabeth to visit her, and the Holy Spirit comes upon Elizabeth. God speaks the word to Jesus at his baptism, and the Holy Spirit comes down on Jesus. And then throughout Luke, Jesus speaks, and the Holy Spirit comes on people, replacing unclean spirits. And then in Acts, the Lord's disciples fan out across the known world. Everywhere they tell the gospel, the Holy Spirit goes to work. So you see it. Luke is a story of how telling the story brings the Spirit to bear. And the same is still true now. Wherever we are bold enough to talk is where the Spirit is at work. Everywhere we tell people that the Lord has fulfilled his mission is where we're fulfilling our mission. And that reminds us deeply of our commission and also of our need for confession.